Welcome to IB Made Simple. My name is Philip, and I will try to get through this topic as fast as possible. This is 2.7, the role of government in macroeconomics, IB Economics. Why do governments intervene? There are five main reasons for that. It is to correct market failures, support firms, promote equity, support poorer households, and collect government revenue. Now, the ways in which government intervene. So you have four main ways: indirect taxes, subsidies, price controls, and the direct provision of services. Now, the first one is indirect taxes. Indirect taxes are usually applied on demerit goods, so goods that are not beneficial to society and they are over provided most of the time. And the over provision, let's assume it is at Q1, and the socially optimal quantity is at Q2. So the quantity that is most optimal for society at a given period of time. So when you introduce a indirect tax, let's say you introduce a tax per unit of $1 on cigarettes. Therefore, what will happen is the supply curve will shift to the left. Why? Because there are less producers producing cigarettes as it has just become less profitable. So instead of them selling for 10, they now legally have to sell for 11 if they want to sustain the same price level as before. So this causes price to go up from P1 to P2 and Q1 to go down to the assumed socially optimal quantity, which is Q2. This eliminates the welfare loss, which is the red triangle thingy over here. So that achieves the government aim of removing welfare loss, which was one of our reasons for government intervention. So, the consumer and producer labels, what do they mean? There is this big box over here, which essentially represents the tax. So this is the total cost of the tax, right? This is $1. Now, depending on the elasticities of supply and demand, the burden that the consumer and producer pay may differ, right? So the consumer would usually pay more of the tax if the demand curve would be inelastic. So in the case of cigarettes, because they are addictive, etc., people are still likely to buy the product even at a higher price. So when producers get hit with a tax, what they think about is, are people still going to buy our product if we increase our price to make up for that tax, right? So what they want to do is they want to maximize their profits by doing so. So what they're going to do is they're going to increase the price and put the burden of the tax on the consumer. This is one of the negatives of indirect tax. It's like one of the disadvantages of an indirect tax is the fact that depending on the elasticity of demand, usually demand, more of the burden will be passed on to the consumer rather than the producer, right? So the consumer box would be like much bigger right here rather than the producer, which would be like much smaller in the case of cigarettes. The next thing is subsidies. So subsidies are usually provided for merit goods, so goods with a beneficial impact on third parties or society as a whole. It's a very similar concept. Government allocates funds to producers, gives money to producers in order for them to produce more, and essentially just subsidizes their production. The whole point is to get the underprovided goods. So let's say Q1, we are currently at an equilibrium of P1, Q1, and the socially optimal quantity is at Q2. So what we want to do, and what the government wants to do, is impose a subsidy so that the supply curve shifts to the right, because there is more incentive to produce more, so producers produce more. And so what happens is price drops, and the quantity goes from Q1 to Q2. Welfare loss is eliminated because we are providing at the socially optimal quantity, and price drops. Many reasons, because producers compete, and also their cost of production falls. Not directly, but because they are given funds, because funds are allocated to them by the government, that causes them to lower prices to an extent. So again, the surpluses, what do they mean? The demand curve, its elasticity is exactly the same way as indirect taxes, right? But here, if a demand curve would be more inelastic, that would also affect the surpluses. As you see, producer is now at the top and consumer is now at the bottom. So if the consumer box is larger than the producer box, that means that the consumers are benefiting more than the producers. Another way in which governments can intervene are price floors and price ceilings. So on the left, we see a price floor. Price floors are usually imposed on demerit goods. So let's say this is, again, the market for cigarettes. It is the most generic example you will find. So yeah, this is a price floor, and it is set above equilibrium. All right, so let's say this is $10, and this is now $11. So this means that firms and producers, it is illegal for them to sell below the price floor. So they have to sell at a price of $11. What will happen is that there will be a surplus in supply, because obviously more suppliers are going to want to produce because of the price incentive. They're essentially going to be making more money if they sell for 11 instead of 10. However, not as many people are going to want to buy, therefore that causes a surplus in supply. So this is arguably more effective at lowering welfare loss than indirect taxes, in the case of cigarettes, some may argue. Now, price ceilings are usually imposed on things like necessities and merit goods. Now, usually necessities, because obviously a price ceiling means that firms cannot charge more than a specific price level. So let's say this was 10, now this is 9. So they cannot sell for more than 9. What this does is it causes less supply and more demand, because obviously if something is less expensive, more people are going to want to buy it. However, not as many firms and producers are going to want to produce it. So this causes a shortage, as opposed to the surplus caused by a price floor. This is the simplest intervention. Actually, no, this is probably the simplest intervention. This is direct provision of services. Essentially, some goods and services are not produced by the private sector due to their unprofitable nature. Therefore, governments take the initiative to provide them as they recognize the benefit these bring to society. Examples of this include public parks and recreational areas, street lighting, national defense, waste collection, and disposal. So this is basically just a government action to provide things that are not provided in a free market, right? A free market wouldn't produce these because they are inherently not profitable at all. Maybe not at all, but like no one would produce them, essentially. And yeah, this is a very simple way of summarizing topic 2.7. Hope you enjoyed. I hope this helped to some extent, and make sure to check out some of our other videos. And yeah, bye.